What if the most powerful financial institution in the world quietly became irrelevant? Not through revolution, not through a new law, but through superior technology and the unstoppable force of free market money. For over a century, the Federal Reserve has controlled America's money, engineered booms and busts, and fueled endless debt. But a new system is rising, one it cannot print, cannot inflate, and cannot control. This is the story of the end of the Fed. Before 1913, most paper money circulating in America was not issued by the federal government. It was issued by private banks. After the charter of the Second Bank of the United States expired in 1836, the country entered the free banking era, which lasted roughly from 1837 to 1863. During this time, many states passed free banking laws. Michigan did so in 1837, followed by New York and Georgia in 1838. These laws allowed entrepreneurs to open banks without needing special approval from the state legislature. All they needed was to meet minimum capital requirements and deposit collateral, usually state bonds or mortgages, with state authorities. In return, these banks could issue their own unique paper banknotes. These notes were liabilities of the issuing bank, backed by the promise to redeem them on demand for gold or silver specie. By 1860, historians estimate there were around 8,000 different banks issuing notes. There were over 30,000 different note designs in circulation, everything from fractional notes worth a few cents to high-denomination bills. Famous examples include the ornate $100 notes from the Quaysake Bank of Newburgh, New York in the 1850s, and beautifully engraved notes from the Northern Bank of Kentucky, featuring presidents and landscapes. Even non-banks got involved. Railroads and companies like the New Hope Delaware Bridge Company issued their own script that circulated locally as money. Notes from reputable nearby banks traded at full face value. Notes from distant or lesser-known banks traded at discounts, sometimes 5%, 10%, or more. Merchants kept note reporters and thick directories to track which notes were good and which were risky. Very similar to how people today check crypto prices and issuer reputations. This system was decentralized and innovative. In well-regulated states like New York, note holders often recovered nearly full value even when banks failed. However, some wildcat banks in remote areas, especially in Michigan's early experiment, were poorly managed or fraudulent and collapsed, leaving holders with losses. Then came the national banking era from 1863 to 1913. During the Civil War, the federal government created a system of nationally chartered private banks. These banks still issued notes, but they had to back them with U.S. government bonds. A 10% tax on state banknotes effectively pushed most private state notes out of circulation, creating more uniformity. For nearly 80 years before the Fed, America ran on competitive private money. Panics occurred, but the system operated without a central monetary authority. In 1913, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act, creating the Fed, promised as the institution that would finally end banking panics and stabilize the economy. For the first few decades, it operated under a gold standard. But after President Nixon ended dollar convertibility in 1971, the Fed gained unlimited power. The results speak for themselves. Persistent inflation that has eroded the dollar's purchasing power by over 85% since 1971. Repeated artificial booms followed by painful busts, most notably the 1929 crash, the dot-com bubble, and the 2008 global financial crisis. Fueled by artificially low rates and the housing bubble, and the extreme monetary response in 2020, global debt exploding to roughly $353 trillion today, with governments and companies planning to borrow another $29 trillion in 2026 alone. A derivatives market with over $800 trillion in notional value, most of it tied to interest rates and inflation hedges. According to Austrian business cycle theory, the Fed's core mistake is simple. By pushing interest rates below the natural rate set by real savings, it creates malinvestment, too many long-term projects that cannot be sustained. When reality catches up, the bust arrives. Bailouts and money printing then plant the seeds for the next cycle. The Fed doesn't solve instability, it amplifies it. This brings us to the bridge that is already under construction. Stablecoins reached a combined market cap of approximately $323 billion in 2026. Led by USDT and USDC, these are privately issued, blockchain-native versions of dollars. They are redeemable at or pegged to $1 and backed primarily by treasuries, cash, and equivalents. They function like the upgraded 19th century private banknotes. Instant, borderless, 24/7 settlement, and on-chain transparency for reserves. Trillions of dollars in annual transaction volume. used for remittances, trading, DeFi, and merchant payments worldwide.
Stablecoins are the on-ramp.
They let individuals and businesses step into digital money without immediately facing Bitcoin's price volatility. They are teaching the world how money can work on rails the Fed does not control. But they are temporary. They are training wheels. As people become comfortable with on-chain finance, many will gradually shift from fiat-pegged stablecoins to native Bitcoin. The destination is a Bitcoin standard. Bitcoin has two critical layers working together: the time chain, base layer, a decentralized, immutable ledger with a hard cap of 21 million coins. No government or central bank can print more.
It provides final, censorship-resistant settlement.
The Lightning Network enables near-instant, extremely low-cost payments. As of early 2026, Lightning capacity hit record highs around 5,600 plus Bitcoin, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It already supports millions of transactions per month and has theoretical capacity far exceeding Visa. Fees are often under a penny. In a Bitcoin-dominated world, the concept of volatility changes completely, because Bitcoin or sats become the unit of account. You no longer measure everything in depreciating dollars. Engineered inflation ends. There is no central authority capable of debasement. The massive debt and derivative superstructure begins to shrink or transform. You cannot endlessly inflate away obligations in a hard money system.
Interest rates are once again set by genuine market forces,
real savings and people's time preferences, not by a committee in Washington. The Federal Reserve loses its ability to steer the entire economy. Its open market operations become largely irrelevant. This transition goes even deeper. Governments have historically ruled through their monopoly on violence, controlling territory, banks, and wages. But that force projects very poorly into cyberspace. When wealth is protected by strong cryptography and private keys, when everyday payments happen peer-to-peer on Lightning, and when economic activity occurs outside traditional financial institutions, taxation and heavy regulation become increasingly difficult to enforce. Compliance shifts from mandatory to voluntary or jurisdictional. People and capital flow to friendlier environments. High-tax, high-control jurisdictions risk losing their most productive citizens and businesses. Just like companies lose customers when they treat them poorly. The state doesn't vanish overnight, but it must shrink and compete. Remaining government functions may rely more on voluntary contributions, reputation, insurance, or subscription-style models for desired services. Of course, the transition will not be painless. There will be volatility, political pushback, and attempts at capital controls or CBDCs. Existing debt will need restructuring. Old institutions will fight to survive, but the direction is clear. The Federal Reserve will not be dramatically abolished in a single vote. It will simply fade into irrelevance, like a central bank whose currency no one uses anymore. Stablecoins are the bridge we are crossing right now. Bitcoin is the destination. The century-long experiment in centrally planned money is coming to an end. The era of sound, market-driven money is beginning. The Fed had a long run, but in the end, the market always wins. The transition is already underway. Like, comment, and share.